guess we're finally live. We're going to take a look here in just a moment at Genesis chapter 16. One of the biggest problems we have with the Bible is we read through the Bible and we say, oh, okay, all these people had problems, and half a page later, it's all solved and God takes care of everything. And we miss the time. Abraham and Sarah will spend something like half a century being told about God's promises and being assured that God is there for them. And, well, as Genesis 16 pops up, now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. They believe God, they're going to have a child and children, and this has gone on for years. Again, it's important to see the chronology, see what's happening, and see how long it takes, lest we fall into that trap of saying, well, look, one page before, God told them everything was going to work out, and they said, okay, and the next day, everything worked out. That's not how it works. And it's easy to look at the Bible and say, well, hey, I could endure. How many temptations did Jesus have? 3. Man, if God just gave me 3 temptations, all within about 10 or 15 minutes, I know I could beat that and never have any more problems. And that's not the way it was with Jesus. How many temptations did Jesus have?
Well, the 3 mentioned were just categories. Because they're lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life, and then everything else kind of falls under those.
But he continues to, the statement is made after his temptation by saying those 3 temptations, that Satan left him how long?
For more.
Till a better time.
Yeah.
How many times between there in the garden do you suppose? 3.5 years of, and John, remember, John's gospel reminds us that the people were, there was constant rebellion and constantly trying to assault Jesus, to kill him, even from the very beginning, his earliest preaching in his hometown of all places, in Nazareth. They tried to push him over the cliff. Wouldn't you? Little hellfire and brimstone, would straighten these people out.
Well, you would have had regular human temptations too.
Exactly.
Don't talk about that.
All the rest of the things. The writer of Hebrews says he was tempted in 1 or 2 things like we are. What was the word the Hebrew writer used? In all things. That's shocking. And I know people that, if you talk about that and say, well, hey, Jesus had to deal with wants and desires for things that he thought, no, that's wrong, and I won't do it. And I've I've had people that are actually insulted by that. No, Jesus could never possibly have wanted to do anything that was wrong. Then it's not temptation. I keep using the illustration. There's absolute, if you bake a rhubarb pie, Sarah, and bring it, I will not be tempted to eat a single bite of it. There will never be any temptation for me to do that. And there's a whole, with every one of us, there are things that you are absolutely not tempted by. But if Jesus was actually tempted, that means he had to have that desire to do something that was wrong and overcome it. And that's the hard part for all the rest of us too, isn't it? Abraham and Sarah have gone for years with God's promise there that, hey, everything will be all right. And there's still no baby. To the point that Sarah, without a child, says, hey, I've got an Egyptian maid, a servant. What was her name? Hagar. Sarah says, now the Lord has prevented me. Remember Adam and Eve, who they blamed for their sin? Somebody else. And the number one culprit was always God. It's God's fault. Sarah says, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Do we ever blame the Lord for things that go wrong? And well, it's obviously the Lord's fault that this hasn't worked out for me. And we never catch on that the Lord has a better plan.
Well, that and we tend to think about we're thinking in our terms, and just because something doesn't work out, we really can't blame God. We did what we wanted.
Well, sure we can blame God. We do, don't we?
Yeah, people do, but they don't think of that. Well, I could have controlled the situation.
It could be. And in a sense, that's kind of Sarah's thought. Says, oh, I've got a good idea. Remember that good idea fairy that beats people senseless with her stick? Not always good ideas, is it?
I've heard it said many times under various circumstances that, well, God made me that way, or made me this way. Well, he made us all as human beings with fleshly, we're tempted by various things, but ultimately, all things come down to a choice. We are given a choice, but those who, and I may be tempted in totally different ways than you and others, but I've heard that so many times. Well, God made me this way.
That's
That
it.
must be all right.
And that's exactly what Sarah did. That's exactly what Adam did. That's basically what all of us as people do. It's God's fault. It's God's fault. Ultimately, everything is his fault. And, as we grow up, one of the lessons, the hard lessons that we learn from our parents is having to take responsibility. Anybody ever fall off their bike when they were learning to ride a bicycle?
Oh, yeah.
And you know how you go over and you kick that bike and show it, and it's the bike's fault. Was it the bike's fault that you fell off? Skinned your knee? No, it wasn't the bike's fault. Well, it was the curb's fault for being there and running into me. We can always find somebody to blame. Now, behold, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. It's God's fault. So, good idea, fairy strikes. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I will obtain children through her. And watch how this, just the first of the 16th chapter of Genesis develops. Abram listened to the voice of his wife, and Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan. And his wife Sarai took Hagar the Egyptian, her maid, gave it to her husband Abram as his wife. And he went in to Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her sight.
Now, an interesting point here, this is almost the same scenario as Adam and Eve.
Doesn't it sound familiar? Honestly, if you jump ahead a few more hundred years, and David and Bathsheba, whose fault is it? Well, Lord, it's your fault. I mean, you let that woman get out there on her roof. By the way, do you know where in that era in the Middle East showers and bathrooms were built? On the roof. Wow. So maybe it was David's fault for looking. How can you miss it? How many other people were on their roofs that night? In a city of maybe 250,000 or so people? Lots of them. In the end, it was David's fault. In the end, it was Sarah's fault. It was Abraham's fault. It was Eve's fault. You know, we're good at pointing the finger. You remember all the things we say as kids? If you're pointing a finger at somebody, the other 3 or 4 are pointing back at you, or one's pointing off into space and not getting anybody, but at least the other 3 are pointing back at you. The reality is, there's a lot of truth to that.
You know, I find it interesting that it says that, you know, when Sarah saw that Hagar conceived, that Sarah was despised in Hagar's sight. And, you know, it's not her fault. She didn't ask for that. She was probably considered property of sorts, and she had to. So, you know, you think, I always thought it was a strange thing, but when you think about it, I mean, how many things would be running through her mind? Now I'm going to be saddled with this child. It's probably I'm not even going to get to own. You know, it's not even going to be mine. But I mean, in all the things that happens, it kind of, whenever I read it, I always feel like it's like she shouldn't be upset about that. It wasn't, you know, but yeah, she had a right to be upset.
Hagar's got a chip on her shoulder, doesn't she? I'm better than you are. I'm pregnant, I have a baby, and you're getting old and you haven't ever had one. And you brag about all these promises. Your God is taking care of you. And he likes. We ever do that as kids? They like me better. All my teachers liked me better. Even the ones that sent me to the principal's office, swatted me with that big paddle. It's easy to fall into that trap. Her mistress was despised in her sight. You know, one of the strange things about blame is there's usually enough to go around, isn't there? We like to heap it all on one person, but in reality, there's plenty to be shared. Verse 5, notice again. And that's why it's so important to sit down and take some time to read these things. You'll find that there's way more than we ever cover. Verse 5 says, Sarai said to Abram, may the wrong done me be upon you. It's not my fault that the good idea fairy beat me senseless and I did all this and made this decision. It's your fault. I gave my maid into your arms, but when she saw that she conceived, I was despised in her sight. May the Lord judge between you and me. God likes me best because I made a dumb decision and it's your fault. Wait, how's that again? You suppose God's sitting up there listening to our thoughts and our arguments about things that we do? Do you suppose it sounds the same to him?
That reminds me of another excuse I've heard. You should have prevented me from doing that. You knew that was going to be trouble. You should have stopped me.
It's definitely your fault. Abram kind of shrugs it off, doesn't he? Verse 6, he says, it's your servant, it's your maid. Do whatever you want. If you don't like her, get rid of her. Behold, your maid is in your power to do with her what is good in your sight. So Sarah treated her harshly. Now, first thought is, ooh, Sarah's fault. She treated her harshly. Why? Because she was mocking her mistress. Don't we hate it when we get something what we deserve for something we've done? That's terrible, isn't it? And she fled from her presence. Just have a look. You recall the incident and the things that happened. The angel of the Lord found Hagar by a spring of water in the wilderness. And he asked Hagar, where have you come from? Where are you going? She said, I'm fleeing the presence of my mistress Sarah. Verse 9, when the angel of the Lord told her to return and submit yourself to her authority. There is nothing in this world when we're packing a mad about something than being told, you need to quit that and do what's right. You don't understand. I don't like what's right. Moreover, the angel of the Lord said to her, I will greatly multiply your descendants, so there will be too many to count. Angel of the Lord said to her further, you're with child, you will bear a son, you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has given heed to your affliction. He will be a wild donkey of a man, and his hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him, and he will live to the east of all of his brothers.
Is that not still evident today?
Yep.
You realize who Ishmael's descendants are?
The Arab people.
The Arab people. And you think God was right? Knew what he was talking about. And it's really strange. And yes, I understand that every single individual is responsible for their own actions. And by the way, there are a number of Arabic churches, God's people, that truly believe and practice New Testament Christianity, that they do the right things. But then how many times do we hear people, in prison? Well, my whole family were criminals and they stole and that's all I ever learned and that's all I knew. And, okay, one little preacher story. In Chicago, there's a big airport known as O'Hare. You know who it's named for? The O'Hare family were mobsters. They ran Chicago. They killed people for a living. They stole from people for a living. And the son of the head mobster young man by the name of Butch O'Hare. When World War II came, joined the military, became a pilot and a hero. O'Hare International Airport was not named for the family of criminals that went before it. It was named for a hero that came out of that and did his life entirely different than how he had been raised. We can't escape whatever the excuse is. In fact, don't we all need to? We need to escape the life in this world and get back to God. Genesis chapter 18. Sarah is 89, Abraham is 99. And God again makes that promise to her. An 89-year-old woman with a 99-year-old husband, and God says, yep, you're going to have a baby. God, you don't know how these things work, do you? And Sarah laughs. One of those great lessons to remember, you've heard people say, the one who laughs last laughs best. God always laughs last. Remember what Abraham and Sarah named that baby? He laughs. That's his name. No, it's not. It's Isaac. If you speak Hebrew, it's what that word actually means is he laughs. God laughed last. By the way, if you remember last week, back in chapter 12, Abraham and Sarah went down to Egypt, and the Egyptian king, Pharaoh, ooh, good looking wife you've got there. In chapter 20, they're not in Egypt. They're in the land that will become known as Israel. And one of the kings there, Abimelech, they go visiting in his city, and guess what? Sarah, good looking woman. And what does Abraham do? I mean, this is a guy that has seen God's hand. He's seen the beginning of God's fulfillment of his promises. His son is on the way. They've gotten into trouble for trying to help God before. And Abimelech said, ooh, pretty girl. Who is she? Oh, that's my sister. You know, Abraham's a great lesson for us. So often we think, hey, anybody that commits the same sin, that makes the same mistake twice, there's no forgiveness, right? Duh. How many more times do you suppose Abram, put in the same situation, would have told exactly the same lie? If you were going to bet money on things, I'd be willing to bet, he's going to do that again. We're slow learners a lot of times, aren't we? Finally, of course, God laughs last. There's a whole lot more to the story. Can you imagine one day as Ishmael is growing up as a young man, and Abram says, oh, I got to take my son because God said to take him over to this mountain. And there I'm going to kill him as a sacrifice to God. By the way, what does God say about child sacrifice? He says he abhors it. Just about the strongest terms. How on earth do you respond when God tells you to do something? And nope. Would it have been okay for Abraham to think, at that point, say, oh, this is God testing me. I know that it's wrong, and maybe I'm supposed to speak up and tell him, I'm not going to do that. Kind of a strange situation, isn't it? And by the way, Abraham starts a great tradition. Husbands, don't tell your wives about those bad things. Apparently, he doesn't tell Sarah, oh, we're going to make a sacrifice to the Lord. He doesn't even tell Isaac. What is it he tells Isaac when Isaac questions him? You remember?
God will provide.
That here's the wood, we got everything, everything for the altar. Well, where's the sacrifice? God will provide. God will take care of that. And by the way, since it's been well over 100 years, how do you suppose Abraham feels about trusting God? It took me 100 years to see the child that was going to fulfill your promises to me, and now you're saying, sacrifice him. How much faith does it take to do the hard things that God tells us to do? Not just the easy thing. God says, hey, go out and spend that $1 million that you just got given. Okay, I can handle that part. But you kind of hate the part where he says, get up every single morning at 6 in the morning and get dressed and go to work and come back home and fight all the traffic to get home at night. Sometimes it's the hard stuff that really shows who we are and how much we do love God. Sarah finally dies 37 years after Isaac was born. She gets to see her son grow up. Okay. If you were put in Abraham and Sarah's place, would you have made the same mistakes? Well, no, I've read the Bible. I won't lie about my wife. Remember that big mean guy with all the soldiers there is saying your wife is really pretty and I would like her, and you do know that I killed the last people that told me no for anything I wanted. What would you say? Do you suppose we would have made exactly the same mistakes? Or different ones? Personally, I think I could make better ones. Bigger mistakes. Here's the challenge. Would we have, through it all, been as faithful? That's the hard part. To face all the things that go wrong. Usually because we messed up. It's bad enough, all the things that go wrong, because, Mark messed up. It's his fault. My wife, it's her fault. And you notice, everybody's good at pointing the finger at somebody else, when in reality, it's me. Okay. Question time. How are you faithfully waiting for God to fulfill his promises?
We live on what's called the microwave generation. I want it and I want it now.
100 years to wait? That's a long time to wait. You sure God knows what he's doing? How on earth can we wait one of the funny things, anybody remember the year 2000?
Oh, yes.
Y2K. There were two big things about the year 2000. Number one, everybody heard that all the computers were going to crash. They didn't. Yes, there was a lot of work done, but surprisingly, even on the ones that didn't get all the corrections, apparently it wasn't that big a deal. But the second one was shouted far and wide by an awful lot of people, so-called prophets. That was the year Jesus was coming again. Do you know how often that story has been told? I've looked at the Bible, I've read it very carefully, and I know exactly the time that Jesus is coming again. And here it is, I'm going to tell you.
Well, Thessalonica, back in the first century, thought it was coming immediately. That's how long it's been going on.
That's how long it's been going on. Since the first century. As Paul was still going around preaching to churches, I think it's going to be in just a couple of weeks. In fact, you remember there was a man at Thessalonica that quit his job and went out and sat on his roof and said, I'm waiting for the Lord to come. It's been a couple of days. I'm getting a little hungry up here. Y'all bring me a sandwich. Okay, I had a sandwich yesterday, and nothing, since then. Can you bring me some fried chicken? And after a couple more days, I'd like steak.
Immediately after Jesus ascended, weren't the apostles looking up, waiting for him to come back?
Yeah.
I mean, from the time he left,
We've been waiting. How do you suppose that Peter felt? You felt as he's being told he's going to die by the Roman emperor? Before this day is over, you'll be dead, and Jesus lied to me. I give up. Here I've spent all these years preaching and teaching people, and I quit. How are we at waiting for God to fulfill his promises? It's hard. If you don't, if you don't understand what this is all about, take a 4-year-old. Right now is a great time. Talk to a 4-year-old and tell them about what they're going to get for Christmas. To a 4-year-old, when is Christmas coming?
In ages, centuries away.
It's never going to come. Christmas is forever. I know old people like us say, well, it's only 6 months away, and we hardly got enough shopping days to get ready for Christmas. But to a child, they have no concept of that long time. And to them, it's forever. It's forever. And we do the same with God. Well, God, you say you're coming back, and it's been 2,000 years. I think. You remember the different arguments that have come over the years? There was the God is dead controversy. He's forgotten us. That's the one that scares me worse than all the people that just outright, I don't believe in God. Because Jesus said when they say to themselves peace and safety, God's forgotten us. Now we can do as we please. He's never coming back. That's the scary time. And it's not always about him coming back and the date of his return. You remember Jesus told about a man that had this attitude. He said, look, I've had a great harvest. My barns are full. I can sit back and take my ease, eat, drink, and be merry. What was it the Lord said to him? You're a fool. Because Jesus is coming tomorrow. No. What was it he said? This day, this night, your soul is required. Your life is over. How do we be faithful in waiting for God to fulfill his promises? It's not easy. If you're Kermit the Frog, it's not easy being green. If you're a Christian, it's not easy being faithful. How do you think Abraham and Sarah felt about God's timing after they had seen everything fulfilled? You know, after it's all over, you look back at anything and that wasn't near as bad. Go to the doctor for a shot and, or surgery and this is terrible, and then you wake up and, that wasn't so bad. Sometimes we fail to appreciate that the worst of the worry is because of us not trusting God. Any other lessons you can think of that you can learn from Abraham and Sarah?
Delay does not mean denial, is what a friend told me one time.
Just because you have to wait doesn't mean it's never going to happen. And that's hard. Again, we're all 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds on that, aren't we? If I don't get it right now, then it means that I'm not ever going to get it. Okay, assignment time. We're going to start looking next week at a couple by the name of Zachariah and Elizabeth. More old people. Oh, man. More old people having babies. As old people. There are some things, some blessings in Scripture that I am very thankful that God doesn't offer to me. That ought to get an amen, shouldn't it? There's a good reason that God lets us have children when we're young. Because there is no way on earth. The best thing about grandchildren is giving them back to their parents. That's fun, isn't it? So have a look, Luke chapter 1. A little bit about Zachariah and Elizabeth. We'll look there next week. Thank you.